So without further ado, I'd like to present Liza Charbel, our speaker. After working in Dubai for a multinational for 10 years, Liza discovered permaculture in 2010 and has practiced permaculture in gardening ever since, in urban Montreal and also in the desert of Senegal, the Costa Rican jungle, and the Andean mountains of Ecuador. She now lives full-time in Montreal and grows food and raises chicken in her front and backyard. So hello, Liza, welcome.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm so good. I'm so happy to be here. Everyone you can hear me and see me, right?
Perfect. I can, yeah.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm so happy that you took some time off of your Friday evening to be here with us. I'm not familiar with Zoom. I'm really not like tech savvy, so bear with me if, you know, during the presentation there are some bugs or I go forward or backwards in my presentation. And as Daniel mentioned, I will be asking if there are any questions, but also more importantly, if you have any material to add to whatever I'm sharing. I must, you know, like I'm continuously learning, and I learn from more experienced gardeners and less experienced gardeners. So I'm, you know, constantly sharing information and receiving information. So I love that. And what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight is really an introduction to small-scale urban permaculture. So we're not going to go dive deep into every subject. We're not going to be talking about specific plants or specific soil types, etc. But we're going to be talking more about how to design your urban space in a way that will create a balanced ecosystems and attract biodiversity in your back or front yards. So let's get started. I'm going to be sharing so my presentation. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Here.
Yeah, I see it coming.
So you see the presentation, the slide, right? Not the whole presentation. Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
Just the slide.
Okay, perfect. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of Tiohtià:ke, which is Montreal, and it's unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory. So whenever we're gardening, whenever we're playing with soil, whenever we're creating gardens and ecosystems in the city, we are on this territory. So we honor it and respect it and recognize that the Kanien'kehá:ka are the traditional custodians of this land and its water. So what is really permaculture? You probably have heard of the term, or you may not. But permaculture is really an approach that encourages us as gardeners to work with nature rather than against it, to design gardens that thrives with minimal intervention. So in ways that we don't really need to intervene. So it's design systems that make it that once our garden is set up, we really have very little to do in our gardens, except really enjoy and observe. Permaculture was really, the term permaculture came out in the 1970s, created by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. They're two Australian designers, gardeners, agriculture, farmers, etc. And basically, they've kind of collected indigenous knowledge, they've collected observations and experimentations on Australian land, and they've put it together. They've kind of democratized the information and under the name permaculture. before that, in the 1930s, there's Ruth Stout, who for 50 years went really against conventional wisdom and never really dug her garden beds. And she developed a sort of low work, low input gardening. And while not enough credit is given to her in the permaculture world, a lot of organic gardeners know about her and of her natural gardening methods. In the 1940s came Masanobu Fukuoka in Japan, and he's written this amazing book called The One-Star Revolution. And he too, a bit like Ruth Stout, really explored what he calls wild farming, which is a way of farming and of gardening that really requires very little intervention. And his story is really amazing. So I encourage you to read about it. And The One-Star Revolution is an amazing, small book about farming and philosophy and life in general. And I highly recommend it. But even before them, really, permaculture is rooted in ancestral practices. And most people don't know, but at least 10% of the Amazon forest is man-made. Because for more than like 8,000 years, people who lived in the Amazon, the inhabitants of the Amazon, the indigenous people, really farmed the Amazon to make it more productive. They kind of favored certain trees and certain crops over others, like, for example, the cacao bean or the Brazilian nut that we all know today. And they eventually domesticated part of the Amazon forest. So really by observing how it functions, by observing the relationships between the different species, they kind of extended the Amazon forest. And the permaculture concepts are really rooted in this kind of knowledge and this kind of philosophy and really the ancestral practices. So I would say, for me at least, permaculture is really a way of mimicking nature in our gardens. And the reason why we want to mimic nature in our gardens is because, first of all, nature, a forest, for example, is so resilient. It's self-regulating. It regenerates itself. It doesn't need any intervention. You know, there's no one comes in and just like plows the land or plants seeds or fertilizes or nothing. Pest control. It's really self-sufficient and resilient and intelligent and kind and generous. So why not really bring all this beauty into our gardens? So one way, the first thing we need to do to bring the forest into our garden is to observe and interact, to start small and slow. And now I'm sharing with you really the agenda of the rest of the presentation. So don't worry if I'm going a bit fast here, because we're gonna go into each point separately. So observe and interact, start small and slow, zero waste and renewable resources. This is all inspired from nature. Creating microclimates, no bare soil because there isn't in a forest, no tilling and no digging, no weeding, less corners and more edges, multiple layers of plants, biodiversity and symbiotic relationships, and finally the sacredness and the healing power of the forest. So we're going to go through these 10 principles that are inspired from nature and from how a forest works, and we're going to apply them to our gardens. Do you have any questions so far?
I don't see any yet, but I did write to everyone in the Zoom chat, so you can enter your questions there. Please feel free to.
Perfect. Okay, so let's keep going. So the first thing is really observing and interacting with your garden, your backyard, your front yard. And not to shy away from growing food in your front yard, to showcase the beauty of urban gardening and edible gardens. So really observing your site for a year in all seasons before starting anything. It's really, I think, important to know how your garden behaves, if you want, throughout every season. To learn the patterns of the sun, of the wind, rain, where does it flood, where is there more water, less water, what kind of animals visit your garden, what are the noises you hear, what are the views you like in your garden. Visit maybe nearby gardens, meet other gardeners in your neighborhood, go to community gardens to understand what grows well, what doesn't in your neighborhood, exchange skills and observations with your neighbors, with other gardeners, know what kind of soil you're growing, and especially observe, for example, what kind of weeds. And when we say weeds, people, they like weeding a lot. So getting on your knees and removing whatever weed is present on your land or on your site or in your backyard. But really, those weeds, they are all here for a reason. They are kind of what we call indicator plants. So observing what grows abundantly in your garden will tell you what kind of soil you have and what does your soil need. You will probably notice that there are, I don't know, for example, here in Montreal, you will notice a lot of dandelion. And this suggests that your soil is acidic. You might also notice there's clover growing here in a lot of places in Montreal, and this means that your soil has some deficiency in nitrogen. Basically, any kind of, and this, you have all this information on the internet or in books, so you just look at plant indicator, you find out what kind of plants or herbs are growing or weeds are growing on your site, and then you look up, okay, what does it mean and how can I remedy, how can I make sure that my soil gets what it needs. And also, I mean, most of these weeds in general are either edible or medicinal or just kind of nutrients for your soil. So I would suggest to, if not removing, not leaving them all, at least just leaving some of them on your site. They're also great food for pollinator and for other insects and possibly birds. So they're very important in this ecosystem. The next thing we'll talk about is starting small and slow. And I like this quote. It says, nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. And it's so true also for our gardens, in a sense that the objective really is to design a garden that is composed of many small parts, each of which contributes to the overall function of the garden. So this way, first of all, it builds your confidence. So if you feel that you're overwhelmed by the space you have, you start small, you will learn from your mistakes, you will know what works, what doesn't. It will also help you react actively and creatively and faster than if you had like started a big garden. So starting slow and small really will help you be more agile in adapting to shifting patterns, to pest populations, and to understand what works well and what doesn't in your garden. And especially, it will build your confidence over the year and your knowledge. So like, for example, in this garden, you can see that the middle circle could be the beginning of your garden, and then you extend until you have like this full, beautiful mandala that is growing food abundantly. So I feel that growing and starting small is a great way of exploring all these design ideas and testing things. Another example of starting small and slow is really, and this is a main principle in permaculture, is to emphasize on growing perennial crops, les vivaces. They're great because, one, they don't need to be replanted every year, so they save you energy, and also they don't disturb the soil as much as annuals do, and they contribute to building the soil. And although the yield might be slower at first, the perennial crops tend to come earlier in spring. They're the first ones to come out, especially in our cold climates. And because here we have a short growing season, perennial crops help us kind of, in a sense, extend our growing season because they don't have to be replanted every year, right? And these are just mere examples of edible and medicinal perennial crops. We have asparagus, garlic, Egyptian onions, runner beans, Jerusalem artichoke. Most of them are also native to Quebec. Wild Spanish spinach, chicory, dandelion, rhubarb, yarrow, and to name a few. So you have a full list of perennial crops that can grow in Quebec, that are edible, and that are very interesting also in the way they bring life and health to your garden. The next point is zero waste and renewable resources. And I really also like this one, which is do what you can, where you are, with what you have. So honestly, this quote really summarizes what permaculture is about. It's really about doing what you can, where you are, with what we have, using the resources around you, and renewable resources, resources that will go back to the earth. For example, here in this garden, that is a permaculture garden, we can see that they've used tree barks, hollow trunks, brick stones, old windows for cold frames, a lot of different elements that they've probably gathered around the neighborhood or in their garden to build different structures. Another example of zero waste, which we mimic from the forest, because obviously the forest does not produce any waste because all its waste is composted, is composting and vermicomposting in our backyards, in our homes, and specifically with vermicomposting and red worms. I don't know if you're familiar with this concept. I know some of you are. Some of you who are listening are familiar with that. But basically, red worms, they're called Californian worms too, or African red worms. They are primary decomposers that eat leaf litter and kitchen scraps, and they transform all this scrap into an incredible, rich plant amendment, fertilizer. We call it the black gold. It also makes this amazing kind of juice or tea that's very powerful for our plants. We can integrate vermicomposting in our garden directly in our soil because if we do it the right way, they can survive the winter. But also, vermicomposting is ideal for people who have little composting space in their gardens and who would like to compost all year round inside their homes. Because vermicomposting can happen inside our homes in a little bucket. It doesn't smell. They're amazing. They're so resilient. They're so amazing to have around, and you just throw all your kitchen scraps and they take care of it. They transforming into this amazing substrate. And also, it's a great way of connecting with other gardeners because sharing worms is very much appreciated by other gardeners. I'm gonna stop here, see if there's any questions or anything you guys would like to add or share with me about whatever I've shared so far.
Well, yeah, we did have a question from, let me just find it, from Reina, who asks, related to soil, if the soil is acidic, is there a way to make it alkaline? How should the earth quality be?
Okay, so yes, you would like it to, you can amend your soil. You can always amend your soil. Sometimes in Montreal, there's a lot of places where the soil is not, how do you call it, like poisoned, not, how do you say it, it's toxic because of different reasons, especially also the train tracks and other kind of things. But otherwise, yes, you can always amend your soil. For example, if it's acidic, you can add lime or compost or wood ash. Always compost will bring life to your soil. You can integrate plants that will make it more balanced, will make the pH more balanced. So yes, there are always ways of amending your soil with whether it's compost or mulching or different plants. But we'll also talk about this a bit later. I hope it's answered the question.
Thank you. That sounded good. And I've got some questions about worms, so I'll just read. I'll read two to you, and maybe you can answer together if it makes sense. So, how do you separate the compost from the worms? Is the first question.
Yes.
The second is, I'm wondering how much food scraps per day the worms can handle. Let's say for a family who eats mainly vegetarian.
Yes. Okay. So for the first question is how to separate. So yes, you harvest the soil every now and then, and the red worms, they don't like light. So that's why they never leave their container. They stay in. They don't like the light. Whenever you open the container, they will kind of disappear under the soil they've created. So when you want to harvest, there are several ways, but one of the best ways is to really open the container, leave it open for a while. This way they go down they stay at the bottom, and you just harvest whatever is on the top. That's one way. And other ways is you separate the container into two, you feed them on one side and stop feeding them on the other side, and then they will all go on one side, and then you collect the other side. When it comes to how much food, really, no, you cannot feed them all your kitchen scraps unless you have a lot of worms, or unless they are straight in your garden or in a big compost bin. But indoors, they will take every week a yogurt container, like a 1 liter container of food, and they will honestly, I have a vermicomposter. We're vegans, so I've never fed them meat, but I've heard that they wouldn't mind it. But preferably, I think just like greens and vegetable and fruit scraps. Okay.
Sorry, I'm here. Yeah, I think maybe we can move on to the next topic, and then there's more questions, but we'll get to them at the end.
Perfect. Okay. So now we're talking about where are we? Microclimates. Are we there? Yeah. So we're talking about microclimates, and the idea that in a forest there are different microclimates. They're not just one microclimate in the whole forest. There are more humid areas, drier areas, places that are darker, places that have more light, etc. So these areas in which the climatic conditions are completely unlike those of the surrounding area will allow to create conditions to very different kinds of plants. So instead of having one microclimate and having just the kind of plants that will thrive in this microclimate, creating microclimates in your garden will help you really diversify the kinds of plants that you can have in your garden. So some plants like more shade, others like more heat, some like heat but less sun, others like more water, others like more dry soil. So creating microclimates in your garden will help you diversify the plants and also the insects that will be attracted to your garden. And you want to attract insects that are that live in different microclimates, because it's a way of preventing a population of just one species from becoming dominant and reducing the overall integrity of the ecosystem. So I hope it's like just what I said is a bit concise and clear, but really creating microclimates in a garden will help create an ecosystem that is balanced, where not just one species is more dominant, and allows you to kind of enjoy different produce in the same kind of space. So, for example, in this image, we can see that just this stone wall that is existing in the garden, it creates heat and reflects heat from one side, the south-facing side, but the other side, the north-facing side, it creates shade and colder, cooler soil. So the same kind of structure is creating two different microclimates depending on what side it is. And other ways of creating microclimates is, we said rock, but also hollow tree trunks, tree stumps, raising your bed, creating ditches to allow more water in, so more moisture, creating curved shapes, because curved shapes first are windbreakers, but also they would create shade and not like more sun in certain parts and less sun in others. Layers of different plants, so higher plants, lower plants, etc., and mulching. And we'll talk about mulching a bit later, but these are all ways of creating microclimates in a garden. Now we are going to be discussing the fact that in a forest, when you walk in a forest, you're walking on dead leaves and all kinds of dead organic matter, even manure from all kinds of animals. So the soil in a garden, or I mean in the forest, is never bare, and you want to mimic this in your garden. When leaves and twigs and branches fall, they serve really as a blanket, one, to suppress weeds and to keep the soil from eroding or drying out. And it will also attract worms and mushrooms and all kinds of soil organisms. They will also decay to become nourishment for future growth. So really, if there is one thing you want to come out with from this presentation, is instead of having bare soil, really mulch is key. Mulching, mulching, mulching. And mulching is really covering your soil with different organic matter. It could be bark or cardboard, finished compost, grass clippings, leaves, newspaper, straw, tree trimmings, but even more importantly, with living mulch. So living mulch could be squashes or a nasturtium. We're going to be talking about the different living mulches just a bit later, but living mulches are the best because they are feeding your soil at the same time, and they're feeding you and they're protecting your soil. So, I mean, I feel this is a really important important topic, the mulching. It's really very important to never leave your soil bare. It should always be covered. And for example, I know that there's this trend of having grass. And grass really is super energy intensive. It requires a lot of maintenance, a lot of water, replacing the grass, etc. And at the same time, it can be replaced by something so much more useful and nourishing for the soil, like clover, for example, or other different living mulches. So, I mean, if there's one thing I would like you to just like keep in mind is really this idea of mulching. Would you have any questions before I move on?
Let's take a look. We still have some questions related to the worms, but
Okay.
not specifically to the. But
Okay.
if people send their questions, we can reach out. We can answer them afterwards. So
Yes,
please
for
do
sure.
continue sending your questions.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so the mulch also will allow less weeding. I don't know if I mentioned it, but yeah, so basically it kind of suppresses the weed from coming out. It keeps the moisture in, so you need to irrigate less. It feeds the soil, and it's great habitat for beneficial insects. So now we move on to this idea of no tilling and no digging. And really, if we think about it, tilling and digging the soil, yes, it can help us loosen the soil. And the first time you do it, you will see that your soil, or you're going to have a high productivity. Because when you till or dig, you're actually killing the nutrients, the microorganisms that are living in the soil. When you kill them, they release nitrogen. And when there's nitrogen rich soil, your plants are going to produce, because this is their main, like their food. But over the years, the more you till, the more you dig, and the less microorganism you have present in your soil to kill. So then your soil becomes dead and empty, and this is when you'll have to start introducing fertilizers, etc. So over time, this loose soil becomes really hard, dry, and nutrient deficient. And even the light tilling, like really like just a bit, will disrupt the surface and will destroy beneficial microorganisms and bacteria that live in your soil. So this is really not what we want. So the reason why we don't till the soil and we don't dig is because instead of killing microorganisms in order to get this nitrogen to produce, instead we want to build this soil. So we go up, we don't dig, we don't till, and we kind of raise our beds. So for example, what we call the lasagna garden bed. It's really like a lasagna, but for a garden. And it's about suppressing the grass with, or the existing surface with cardboard or paper, and then adding straw and leaves, then food waste, manure, another. So it's really like doing a lasagna, but with manure, food waste, soil, and organic matter. And then at the top, planting, because all of this will decay, all of this will decompose, and it will feed your soil. So instead of tilling it and digging it, you're building it. And by doing this, you will also need less watering. You can do it in areas where the soil is poor. So a bit, come back on the question. This is a way of kind of amending your soil, because here you're building it in a way that you're feeding it with all of this organic material, organic dead material, and the food waste, and the straws and the leaves and the manure, etc. At the same time, it's also a way of producing raised beds for one, easy access, but also in Montreal, for example, sometimes you have flooded areas. So when you raise your beds, you help your soil be not become flooded. So I'm gonna keep going. So this is about, we have the example of lasagna bed. So this is what it looks like in reality. And so this is, for example, how one of the raised beds we've worked on. So you see, we put newspaper all around the grass to suppress it, and then we build on top with layers of grass and grass clippings and dead leaves and soil and compost, and we build up. Another way of building up is the hugel culture. Probably some of you have already heard of it, but it's basically raising your beds with tree trunks and branches and trimmings and compost, etc., to raising it this way, and at the end it will look like this. So from this to this, and it's also a way of, one, building your soil, keeping the moisture in, not having to water much. Actually, with the hugel culture, people say that they don't really water so much. And creating microclimates, because on top you have more sun, on the lower part you have less sun, on top you have less water, on the bottom you have more water, etc. So it's a way of combining, one, creating microclimates, using your waste in an effective way, and three, mulching. Okay, so I don't know if you have questions. I'm gonna keep going. Just
go ahead. Yeah, we'll keep going.
Yeah, perfect. So the seventh point is really less corners and more edges. What it means is that really in a forest, if you think about it, there are no rectangles or triangles or squares in a forest. There are really a lot of, instead, round shapes and a lot of patterns, spirals and circles. They're all common patterns in nature, but also in the universe. And this is something that we want to emulate, we want to mimic in our garden, we bring into our garden, because not only they make you feel good. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been into a round house. The energy when you come into a round space is so different than when you go into like a square space. And if we want to think about construction and the way our houses are built, they're square. The wind really hits hard on flat surfaces. The sun too, when it's round, the wind comes around it and it just goes around. And the sun too, it doesn't hit at one specific spot all day long, you know, it's just kind of distributed evenly. So energetically, in terms of how much heat and how much air conditioning you need in a round house, it's very different than in a straight squarish house or rectangular house. And the same applies to your garden. Using those patterns really help you smartly use your space in ways that I'm going to talk about a bit. I'm going to show some examples. So really break the squares and the rectangles in which we grow our food, and creatively use get inspired from the shapes you see in nature. Like spirals, like pine cones, snail shells, seed patterns, etc. The other thing I want to talk about is edges. So we talked here about the fact that we don't want to have, or at least want to avoid as much as possible, having corners in our garden. And the second is really creating edge in our garden. What is an edge? It's really the interface between two ecosystems or surfaces that meet. Yeah. So let's say, for example, a border between two countries. The edge is this border where two cultures meet. And where two cultures meet is so much more rich. Where the air meets the water, where the forest meets the grassland, the land meets the ocean, or the zone around a plant root in the soil. The edges are really productive systems where two ecosystems meet, where two different species meet. And so it becomes much more productive and much more interesting. But also, if you want to think just about production, it increases your yield. So in this slide, you can see that if you have a round garden versus a garden with a lot of edges in the same kind of space, you will produce more because your edges give you more yield. I hope it makes sense. But we're gonna look at some examples and just maybe inspire you a bit to kind of integrate this in your spaces. So for example, this is a garden that has a lot of edges, that has a lot of patterns, different patterns, that is also very pleasant to walk through and to see. You can see that on the four corners there are some ponds, so the edge between water and soil, and this is where a lot of things happen. You have round edges, spirals, etc. in this garden. Same here. So you have the edge between rock and the stones, the bricks and the soil. You have edges between wood and soil. You have in the right-hand side, in the right-hand side picture on the right hand, you have a spiral we're going to be talking about. So there are different patterns inside the same garden, and it's not square. It's really like flowy, and it's, I think, it's very beautiful too. Another way of also using edges is really trying to grow heat-loving vines, like beans or grapes or kiwis, melons and squash on the side of a brick wall, because it really kind of produces thermal heat, and also to soften the edges between the garden and the built environment. So kind of creating like a green wall around you. This is another idea of having in your garden, and this is like I would say a small-sized pond. It can be even smaller than this. I find it really interesting to have a pond or just like a little kind of water bowl in your garden for many reasons. The first thing is that it provides water for insects and other animals. And for those who have the problems with squirrels, I know I've had some in the past, but squirrels, I believe, and I've kind of experienced it, that when they come for your tomatoes, for example, if you've noticed, they will take the tomato and they will just kind of bite through it and then leave it here. And that's because they're actually thirsty. So they're looking for the juice of the tomato. So having water laying around for the birds, for the squirrels, will save you some headaches, you know. At the same time, if you can have, I don't know, like, I remember we had a mosquito problem at one point in one of the gardens we were designing, and having a pond is kind of counterintuitive, because you're like, oh, but if you have a pond, then we'll have even more mosquitoes, unless you introduce fish or frogs in your pond, and especially fish here in urban setting, you know, like guppies, for example, they will eat mosquitoes and mosquito larvae. They will feed off them, and you will see that in a decrease in a mosquito population whenever you introduce a pond with some fish or frogs. So it's a great way of integrating edges and shapes and microclimates in a garden. So this was, for example, a pond that we created at the Olympic Stadium. This was a garden that we designed a few years back on the Olympic Stadium Esplanade, and we created a pond there. And this is the final result. And I feel that, you know, the rocks bring a lot of heat and also habitat. There's some aquatic plants growing there. There are guppies, fish in the pond. There are plants that are that like more moisture around the pond, and it's also such a beautiful kind of view to have a pond in your garden, but it's not for everyone. So I do understand if it's a bit intimidating. Another way of creating edges in your garden is with this design that we call the keyhole garden. So basically it looks like a keyhole, and it's just increasing, it helps us increase the edges and give us access to our garden from the keyhole. So this is, the keyhole is where you stand to have access to your garden. And in Canada, or at least in Quebec, it's raised beds, keyhole, but in places that are drier, they're dug. So you kind of dig the garden bed. This is an example of a keyhole garden. This is how it looks like in real life. And also you see there's round shapes, a lot of edge, stones, rocks used, even wood used, and tree trunks that are integrated, etc. And you have a spiral at the end on top here too. Another way of having like kind of using shapes is this African keyhole garden. We've explored this design in Senegal, in Africa, in a really dry climate where there was barely no water. And in French, it's called la poubelle nourricière. And it's really like it literally says that it's feeding garbage, because in the middle, I don't know if you see the little round in the middle, it's like a compost bin where you throw in your compost, so your kitchen scraps, and your gray water. So water that, you know, not clean water, but water that you've used, that you want to get rid of. It goes there in the middle in the basket, and this basket will feed the rest of your garden. Now, the measurements of this garden are very specific to enable it to be efficient. So it's 1.5 meters in diameter. And the circle in the middle is 50 centimeters diameter. So I'm just going to show you how it looks like, sorry, in real life. So this is a bit how it looks like. You can see that the middle is kind of a place to throw your compost, and around it you grow food. This is the one we made in Senegal. And this is what it looked like a couple of weeks after, because really you don't have to water it and you don't have to feed it. You don't have to do much. You just have to, at the end of the day, throw your kitchen scraps and your gray water in the bin, and then that's it. That's all you have to do. So that's a really nice design, I find. It's really, really simple and intelligent. Now we get to the herb spiral, which is also very interesting to have in your garden. And this herb spiral really allows you to create microclimates in a small space, because the spiral goes up. So see, this is one that it was just, we made this in Ecuador. So that was the first day it was planted. It looks much lush after a few days. But as you can see, it's raised. So the top part has more sun, less water, and the lower part has less sun and more water. So you can in a very small space create microclimates and grow plants will have different needs. Whereas if it was just flat, you wouldn't be able to do so. At the same time, the rocks will store the heat or the cold whenever the soil needs it, and it will also store or just keep water in. And then you see it's mulched, and it doesn't show here, but this big plant at the bottom that's growing out, it's an aquatic plant. And so at the bottom of the spiral, you can have like a tiny, tiny mini pond and grow like a little aquatic plant in it. This is another spiral garden. Some of you will recognize it. Some of the participants I've worked with have designed this all together on SHRUB in Montreal. This is a spiral too, and you can see at the bottom, I don't know if you see it, at the bottom left, there's like a pink container, which is our little pond, and it was just like a nice addition to have integrated in the spiral. This is the overall design. As you can see, it's not squarish. There's like a flow. This is from above. And this is what it looked like a week or two later, I don't know, a few weeks later. It was so lush and so amazing and beautiful. And this is the spiral. I don't know if you see it, but the nasturtiums are coming out from it. And this garden really looked amazing. And I feel that the reason why is just because this design was so flowy and beautiful. And you kind of see the spiral. It's almost in a heart shape and really amazing. This is what it looks like from the side. And other fun and creative shapes, you know, you can always just like be very creative and try out new things. This is it's on the same, it's in the same place. It's another garden on Sherbrooke, and it was, we just designed it as a flower because it was a pollinator garden, a garden for and I forgot my terms, basically for bees and butterflies, and it's the shape of a flower, and it had a lot of flowers, and this is what it looked like a few weeks later, from this to this. And it just goes to show you that I feel that when you put love and creativity and the right, you know, just amount of energy into your garden, it just overflows with abundance. This is another example. See, for example, this was designed in the shape of a petal. Okay, so any questions so far before I keep going?
I'm just going to take a look. Why don't we keep going?
Okay.
And because I have some questions from previous topics, and we'll, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, okay, cool. Okay. When we talk also about using edges and not having corners, it's really also about using every nook of your garden to cultivate different crops. Even the darkest nooks can be used, for example, to grow mushrooms. So really using every single part, depending on what microclimate there is there, to create something that will produce something for you or for other animals or insects. Just because it's also has something to do with edges, I'm going to talk about the OLLAS. This is a really old ancestral technology, very smart, very simple, very affordable, and that I really love and that I integrate in my gardens. OLLAS are clay pots, unvarnished clay pots that are like containers that you bury in your soil, in your garden. You bury several ones around your garden. I would say like every 1.5 meters or 1 meter, you have an OLLA. And basically what it does, that you fill it up with water and you cover it because you don't want insects to fall into it and or for the water to evaporate. So you cover it up. And because the clay is not varnished, it's a natural it's a natural material. It's a natural material. It breathes. So when your roots are thirsty, it's going to kind of make some pressure on the OLLA, and it will take the water it needs. And when your roots are not thirsty, it's just going to leave the OLLA alone. So it's like an automated irrigation system that is 100% natural, beautiful. So this is me, for example, planting an OLLA under a tree, a fruit tree. You see, we dug the hole, and then this is another fruit tree. But yeah, basically you dig the hole, you fill it up, and I would say here in Quebec, you fill it up once a week. So this way, you don't really need to water your plants every day if you have enough OLLAS in your garden. So it's a way of saving time. It's a way of producing moisture and also of saving water, because If your plant isn't thirsty, it won't require water. It will only take water whenever it's thirsty. And also, because the olla is buried, the root of the plant or of the tree will go straight to get water. Whereas when you irrigate, some portion of this water you irrigate with is lost, evaporated, or just lost because it's on the upper layer of the soil. I think I'm gonna, this is a do-it-yourself olla, so it's just gluing together two clay pots and then making sure the hole in the bottom is completely closed and covered to prevent leakage. I think I'm gonna, it's 8, so I'm gonna go a bit faster, yeah?
Well,
yeah.
I mean, a lot of people are asking if this is going to be recorded, and it is being recorded, and it'll be available. So you please keep going. I mean, there's so much interesting information.
Okay, so now we're talking about multiple layers, and I'm just gonna really go through them quite faster than because I feel that I'm taking a bit more time than I should have. So multiple layers, really it's this idea that in a forest you don't have just one layer, right? So when polyculture or in the gardens, you can see that there's just like one layer or 2 layers. But to mimic a forest, you need multiple layers in your garden. In a forest, there are 7 layers. The tree layer, the shrub, the herbaceous, the root, the ground cover, and the vine layer. Now, in a garden, depending on its size, you can't have the 7 layers, but at least you can have maybe 5 or 4. Let's have a look at what I'm talking about. So the tree layer, in a small space, you can have dwarf trees, or tomato plants can play the role of a tree. And these will create shade for other plants that need it, okay? So make sure you have whatever tree layer, it could be a plant or a dwarf tree. Shrub layer, usually here, and they're perennials, so they come back every year. Any kind of berry tree, berry shrub, like raspberry, blueberry, or blackberry. Then the herbaceous or the FORB layer, and here we talk about, for example, rhubarb or pepper plants, chive or eggplants, etc. So plants that are around 40 centimeter high. Then we talk about the ground cover, and here again, these are edible ground covers like nasturtiums or Virginia strawberries that are perennials, or acorn squash, or any kind of squash, big or small depending on your space. These create amazing ground covers. Then you have the vines, you have grapevines. A lot of people don't know that kiwi can grow in Montreal, but yes, kiwi does, and it's a vine. Pole beans and pole peas are great vines also to use in your garden. So trees, shrubs, herbaceous, vines, ground covers, the root layer, so I would say like carrots or beets, potatoes, onions, garlic, etc. These are the root layer. And these help really bring nutrients into the soil and breaking it in the soil. And my favorite, which is this layer that is the underground layer, are the mushrooms. And I'm going to stop myself from talking too much about mushrooms because it's like a subject that I'm really passionate about. So I'm going to try to be very concise. Mushrooms, and without them, or mycelium. So the mushroom is really the fruit of the mycelium. The mycelium is underground, and the mushroom is really the fruit of it that comes out and that we see. And without mycelium, we call it the mother of gardens and forests. Without mycelium, forests don't exist. It's very simple. Mycelium is like the biggest, I think, living organism in the world, because it's really, you just see the tip of it, you see the mushroom, but it's underground. It's like a network underground that does so many things I'm going to talk about. And it's I think the most intelligent organism in the world. It filters and stocks water, so whenever it's raining, it drinks the water, stores it for drier days, it breaks the organic matter, it transfers nutrients from one plant or tree to another. So for example, in a forest, you have the upper layer of trees, the canopy, they get the most sun. I think they get like 80–90% of the sun. And the herbaceous plants or the vines, they need the energy of the sun too. So the mycelium will go get this energy from the tree and transfer it to the other plants that don't get this the sun energy. Same for nutrients. This plant is producing a certain nutrient that this other plant needs. The mycelium will kind of transfer the nutrients. It's like amazing. It also is a great pest control. And so it's like a pesticide in your garden. And tests show that the productivity of a garden with mushrooms is 4 to 10 or to 6 times more than a garden without mushrooms. So I highly encourage integrating them in your garden. And if you're a geek, Mycelium Running is the book for you if you're into mushrooms. Okay, so I'm almost done with mushrooms. There are 3 easy ways of growing mushrooms, and of course you want to integrate mushrooms and you want to integrate edible mushrooms in your garden. First way is to inoculate a log, and reishi and shiitake are medicinal, very potent, amazing mushrooms that you can actually harvest in your garden and inoculate a log quite easily. I would suggest to go to the Miko Boutique on Saint Denis. They have everything for mushrooms, mushroom growing. And when you inoculate a log with mushrooms, then you use this log in your garden to create edge, to create like a kind of a border, right, in your garden. So instead of using just any regular logs in your garden, use inoculated logs. Another way of growing mushrooms is in straw or wood chips, but not cedar wood chips because they're antifungal. So, for example, the wine caps or faria, which is very common, and the oyster mushrooms, they grow in straw or wood chips. And the third way of growing mushrooms is in compost, straight in the compost, like the shaggy mane and the morel. They grow in compost. Okay. We get to our before last point, which is also quite long, but I'm going to try to skim through it. Biodiversity and symbiotic relationships. We all know that in a forest, there's not just one kind of tree or one kind of shrub. There's a biodiversity, not just one kind of pet or animal, very biodiverse. And we want this in our garden to make healthy, balanced ecosystems. The first way of creating symbiotic relationships and biodiversity in your garden is what we call companion planting. This is a concept I think most of you have heard of. Basically, plants have friends like humans, and they have other plants that they like less, like humans. So it's about putting plants that like each other together, because otherwise they won't be very happy plants. So that's the main concept, and I'm not going to go through every kind of example because this is super available on the web and in books. So this is one way. Very kind of the symbol or the mascot of companion planting is the 3 sisters. It's an indigenous companion planting or guild, and it's about corn, beans, and squash growing together. So first you plant the corn. The corn will support the beans. So after you plant the corn, you plant the pole beans that will be supported and grow on the corn. And then you plant the squash 1 week later, and the squash will create the cover, the cover, like mulch, the living mulch for the peas, or the beans, and the corn. And the peas and the beans, depending on what you choose, will fix nitrogen in your soil. So they're very important to have in this companion planting. So this is a very popular one. Oh, this is a slide that can take a lot of time, but I'm happy that first of all, I would love to share this presentation with you. Like, I want you to have this presentation so you can come back to it and come back to this information, because I feel now that it's quite heavy. But basically, we said that we want layers, right? We talked about them, those layers, the trees and the shrubs, etc. And within these layers, we want also nitrogen fixers. So food for the soil. Nitrogen fixers can be legumes, but also clover, for example. You want nutrient catchers, so the root system that will, deep roots that will catch the nutrients. You want living mulch, we've talked about it, and you want also insect attractors. So I think that this slide really summarizes what we've talked about. There are the layers, there are edges because we have a little swale or a little pond, and we have also this symbiotic relationship that exists between plants with the nitrogen fixer, the different roles, basically. So I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to talk about chickens, because in this slide on the right-hand side, you can see that there are chickens, and I myself raise chickens in our backyard. Right now, they're not here. They're at my cousin's place, but they come back usually in end of winter. So we grow them in the garden. They are so, they're so important to have in a garden for many reasons. And basically, not only if you're not vegan, will they provide you with eggs, fresh eggs, real eggs, but they are also pest control, and they will spread mulch, and they will create nitrogen for compost. They will fertilize your soil. Their manure is amazing. They will kind of till your soil, they will work your soil. So honestly, they're amazing companions for permaculture gardens. You can have them in Montreal, in your urban garden. Yes, there are some neighborhoods that don't allow them, including the one I live in. But as long as your neighbors are happy, as long as you provide them with eggs, fresh eggs, and you talk to them about, they will see, first of all, you don't want to have a rooster, so just chickens. But in general, we've had them, and I think this is the third season. This will be the fourth season, and we've never had a complaint. And the kids love it, and it's an amazing social tool also, because neighbors come and are curious, and you get to know the neighbors, etc. So chickens, amazing in garden. Now, bats. So there are bats in Montreal. We've seen them flying around. At least I've seen them flying around. And bats, they're kind of vilified, but they're amazing companions too. Building bat houses is quite easy. You can find do-it-yourself tutorials online. But bats really not only are they amazing pest control, because they eat like thousands of insects and mosquitoes, including mosquitoes during the night when everybody's sleeping. They are really working hard, but also their manure is gold manure. And I remember at one point I was living in Costa Rica, and we had built this bat house, not just like a little box, but a complete house where they were living, and we'd go and collect the manure every now and then, and it was just pure gold. It's amazing. So I highly encourage integrating bat houses in your garden. It will be so beneficial for you and your pest control, basically. One second. Another way of integrating biodiversity in your garden is really building insect hotels. It's really a way of a place for them to hibernate in winter, but also a nesting place in the summer. And this way you have like available all kinds of insects at all times in your garden, like ladybugs, bees, wasps, lacewings, pince-oreilles. And so it's a great way of having like your pest control at hand in your garden, and it looks amazing too, I think. Another really easy way, if you don't want to do all of this, another easy way to have, to attract insects, beneficial ones, and just have an overall balance in your garden is to keep a little wild zone in your garden, somewhere where weeds are growing and it's just a bit more chaotic than the rest of your garden, because this is where really they will go and lay their eggs and find little nooks to hide and to live in, etc. So I would recommend really giving a little wild zone in the back of your garden for them, and always have water at hand for, if you don't have a pond, for butterflies and bees and all kinds of insects come, and even little animals, to be able to hydrate themselves in the very warm summer days in Montreal. I'm almost done, so I'm just going to touch base on the sacredness and the healing power of the forest with this quote: choose only one master, nature. And really, you know, I think we all know how good it feels to be in nature, how reconnected we feel. By the way, if you look at this picture, we also have insect hotels, these like wooden boxes on the side and the right side. These are insect hotels too. So it's such a great way to reconnect and just release all the stress and learn and explore. And for kids, it's amazing to have this garden where they can taste things and watch and observe little insects, etc., and worms. And I mean, I don't know. I don't think anyone can argue that it's so amazing to have contact with nature every day. And this is why I think it's important in a garden to also have a social space, a place where you can receive friends, or a place where you can just chill and relax, like a hammock, for example. So always account for this kind of space in the middle of your garden, and not necessarily like, you know, separated from the garden. Okay, guys, I'm done, and I'm just going to share with you some resources. I wanted to talk about the Miracle Farm. And this movie called The Permaculture Orchard. It's a farm in Saint-Anicette, which is like south of Montreal. It's an amazing orchard that is a permaculture one, very diversified, super interesting to watch the movie, but also to go visit. Another resource I wanted to share with you is the permaculture design certification that is offered by the P3 Permaculture. You can also always go to their website, P3 Permaculture. It's in Wakefield, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in July this summer. And it's in English, and it's, I mean, it's a great way of getting more, like digging in and like just 1 week of immersion, permaculture immersion. Another resource is the Design Écologique Québec with Gwen Roland, and he has lots of workshops, and his website is also very informative. And if you're looking to grow food, but you know you haven't started growing seedlings yet, or you know you want to buy some seedlings, a great place is Pépinière Croque Paysage in Val-David. They are a permaculture jardinerie or pépinière, and they have so much knowledge. All the people there are trained in permaculture and in organic ecosystems, natural farming, natural gardening. So they're a great place to find seeds and seedlings and trees and shrubs, etc. And these are all the books that I really like, that I've read, that have inspired me and inspired this presentation, and so many more, but these are just like a bit. So, this being said, thank you so much. I hope I did not bombard you with too much information. Yeah, now I'm ready to take your questions.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Liza. That was, my brain is so full. I'm moving to a new place with a big garden space, and I have notes for myself too.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm happy, yeah.
I just want to read, we don't have a lot of time for questions, but 2 came up that were sort of related to space. And so one, we have a question from Orlando who asks, can these principles be used for indoor gardening?
Indoor gardening. I mean, you're talking about like a greenhouse, for example. I just want to specify. Are we talking about a greenhouse or a house, like
I
indoor?
think maybe they're talking about, you know, let's say someone who does not have any outdoor space in their dwelling. Yeah.
Honestly, it's hard because you want to have, right, the little insects, and so inside the house it's a bit hard. There are certain ways of growing. So for example, there is aquaponics. So it's like a way of growing food indoors vertically and growing fish too. So you can eat the fish and harvest the fish. But in terms of like growing a permaculture garden indoors, it's a bit difficult because you need all this ecosystem, the biodiversity that comes with the insects and all, you know, so it's hard. But I would say that on a balcony or on a terrace, definitely you can. And if you're interested, I am giving a free workshop on the 6th of May on growing food on balcony and little terraces. So permaculture in pots if you want, or permaculture on terrace. So if you're interested, you can always write to me. I'll send you my presentation, but you can also share my contact so people can always come back to me with questions or any kind of resource they need.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I think maybe we'll end there with the questions, but knowing that I will send out you the slide and your email address to all the participants.
Yeah.
It will be recorded. Orlando says thank you for the
thank you guys so much.
And we have lots of questions, lots of thank yous, and very inspirational. I agree. So it was lovely to hear you. Thank you, Liza, so much. And
thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. Tomorrow's another beautiful day.
Yes.
Like today, almost 25 degrees.
Yes.
So I hope that everyone gets outside and have a lovely evening, and see you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, Liza. Bye.